So here's our agenda today. I would like this to be extremely interactive, and that I want everybody to have a specific project that you're working on. Pull it up and let's start thinking about that. And if everybody can throw in one of their active projects into the chat, then we can kind of pop around and actually look at stuff that's being worked on. And maybe, like, this will be shared, so maybe there's some things that we should not be sharing. So if, when you put it in the chat, just say, don't share this one on the screen, and we'll keep it private. But if you just have a personal project or some personal thing that you can share, that'd be great as well. So let's see some of the projects. For mine, I'm gonna play around with the Edgar Allan website. So I'll throw that into the chat. Give you guys a minute to find your URLs. So here's the Edgar Allan site. I'm sure this is very familiar with some of you. Marina, I think you're doing a lot of the work on Edgar Allan these days. So nice. So here is tonic is something we've done in the past. This is the fake tonic. This is very nice. Oh, sorry, not to be shared. We'll edit that out. Okay, I hope all of you have something open. Share it in the chat if it's worthwhile. I've seen this shim error on a lot of different websites. I'm not sure where this is coming from, but something we should probably fix at some point. So the first thing I want to talk about is these ways of debugging your code. I'm pretty sure all of you have had some familiarity with each of these, but let's just quickly run through debugger, breakpoints, and console log. Debugger is a little bit harder to do because you have to write it into the code. So if we were to look into I could come into my Slater. I think it's in my Slater JS class. I've got an update for Slater that will make this much easier to find your project, where you'll just be able to take a URL that gets printed out and it will take you to that page. But I think this one is going to be probably in card game, and yeah, I'm not exactly sure where this is, but what you're gonna do is, looks like someone's already written a debugger here. If you save that, then when you run your code with inspector open, it will stop your code at that particular spot. So let's go back. I'm just gonna remove that for now, because we can do the same thing within the sources panel. So I'm gonna do Command P, and I'm gonna find Slater. So this Slater 281, and this is some JavaScript that I'm not sure who wrote it. Marina, maybe you, maybe someone else. But what I can do is I can just click on this bar here, and that's going to stop the code at that point. So now if I refresh, so it's going to stop it here, and now I can see if I'm actually getting what I think I should be getting for each of these. So the submit button's there, the honeypot is there, and what you'll find oftentimes if you're, so that didn't work because I'm on that one, and so you'll notice if I take this piece, then I get the form object. Maybe that's not on the page. Let's try that again. Okay, so there is the form object. So now the form object should be available because I had stepped down a line, and so that variable gets that value. And so you'll notice with debugger or a breakpoint, you're going to get this little thing here. It's this same bit here, but I can do this one to move one step down my JavaScript. And so a lot of times this is really useful if you need to understand the context of your JavaScript. So you can throw it into a click event, and then when you click that event, you can start seeing like what's the E value for that particular thing, or what's the value of that submit button at that moment. And then once you're ready to just kind of let the page run, you could just click this one and it will just let it go. These ones are potentially useful if you're running over a function and you want to actually see the values within that function. Then you can use these ones. Going back, it never seems to work for me. Like JavaScript is meant to be one way, but they do have this back button. So in theory, you can step out of a current function. Cool. So the one other thing is the console log. I use all three of these kind of interchangeably. Sometimes I want to only know about a specific variable, and in that case I can just run a console log and I can see that value printed out each time with the console log. But if I need to really understand what's going on above and below that console or that piece of code, then I oftentimes will turn to debugger or breakpoints. Debugger's a little obnoxious because you then have to go back and delete it later, whereas breakpoints you don't have to be jumping back into your code. But we'll notice we have some console logs here. So this piece of code, what it's doing is it's setting a honeypot. I didn't write this. I don't really understand the details of it, but it's making it so that we're getting a lot less spam coming in through this form here. So you'll notice if we do this, and potentially this, when I click this, it's going to put me into this click event here. And now I can start seeing like, okay, this honeypot value length, that was false. And so it's going to bounce me to this code as opposed to this code. And so this is all extremely valuable in kind of understanding, okay, my code's not working. Why is it not working? Your methodology should be like, okay, what's the chunk of code that is broken? And then get more and more defined in exactly why it's broken. So with that said, any questions on these debugging tools? Has everybody used those and have a good grasp of how to use those?
Not yet, but I saw you use them yesterday, and now I understand them. So the other way around, but I got there. It's fine.
So Marina, you asked, does debugger work if it's added to Slater? And it does. So if you have the right file open, the critical thing is like you have to right click and inspect it so that you have this console open. If you're just running like this, those breakpoints and those debuggers will just be ignored. So by design, I'm sure. Like you don't want your end user to get the page stopped if they're just kind of browsing your website and you forget to remove your debuggers. Generally speaking, debuggers should be removed anytime you're pushing code to production, to a live environment. Console logs, in theory, like you can keep them in. A lot of developers do. I hate it when when specifically Loom. Loom drives me nuts. So if I go into, let's see, where are you at? If I turn on Loom and then I'm looking at my console, you'll notice that, let me turn that off. Let's see. You'll notice like Loom starts throwing all sorts of errors, and it's not doing as much now as I've noticed. But in the past, like there would always be errors in my console, and it was because of Loom and or some other extension. And these extensions, they kind of take over your browser, and so they can like you can see errors in your console that may not be related to the code you're writing. So just be aware, like extensions can confuse you. I like my code to not be running errors, but you'll notice it's been a while since I've looked at Airbnbs, but they used to throw all sorts of errors. It looks like they cleaned up their console, but it's not weird to see errors being thrown in the console for like production sites. But obviously Airbnbs, they've worked to clean it up, and they're now marketing to developers with that console log, which is kind of cool. Okay. Yeah, so Berno's saying it. Adobe plugins do that too. So it is super obnoxious when you're writing code and you're getting all these errors from some other place loading into your console. Another common thing is Google Tag Manager. So someone who owns that Google Tag Manager can inject all sorts of JavaScript. That JavaScript breaks often, and as developers, we may not have access to kind of resolving that. Anything else we want to talk about with debugging? Just one last example for Berno, who's here. Yesterday, he was having some issues with a particular project where he had written some good code using Slater, but it wasn't working. And the reason it wasn't working was because the selector was just off a little bit. And so me and him worked together to like add some debuggers and some console logs to understand, okay, this selector is not pointing at the right piece of HTML. And so it was just a few little tweaks that we had to make to get that code working. Cool. So let's talk about jQuery and JavaScript. So I'm seeing a lot of JavaScript because by default, Slater AI is writing JavaScript and not jQuery. But I do want to show a few instances where it's really a lot easier to write jQuery, and why I recommend you use jQuery to start. So let's hop into here. We're not going to write too much in Slater. I'm just going to use the console for a lot of this. So one thing I can do with just plain old JavaScript is I can say document dot query selector, and let's just get the H1. And so you'll notice that's getting this H1, and so I can write something like dot inner text, and there I get that inner text. I can do the same thing with jQuery. And that gives me a jQuery array or object. And so to get that H1, I'm just getting that first array item here. And so I can also do this and get that same text. So those are fairly analogous. I wouldn't say one's that much easier. Of course, this is more condensed. But where this can be easier to write jQuery as opposed to just pure JavaScript is let's write dot fake class. And you'll notice this gives me that same array. And if I do .text here, it gives me nothing. If I do the document dot query selector dot fake class, you'll notice I get null. And so now if I do this dot inner text, I throw an error. So I kind of have to write error handles for my methods that I'm writing to my selections. I think I can do this, and then it fixes it. So that's one way of solving it. The other way is like you can say like var test equals this, and then you can say if test, and then test dot inner text. And you'll notice this is going to be null, and so it's just going to skip over this, and it's not going to throw an error. So that's kind of one example of kind of how I think jQuery is better and easier. Let's look at this other one. So that was the error handling one, but the click event on multiple items. So if I want to write a click event for, let's just say a p tag. So document dot query selector all. You'll notice that query selector is going to give me one item. Query selector all is going to give me all of them. So it's going to return an array of 57 nodes. If I want to write add event listener, listen, okay, let's do this. Var p equals, I did p's. So now if I do ps, I get all of those. ps dot add event listener dot click, and then I write a function. So I can just do console.log. I'm just going to say click. So you'll notice I can't write that event listener to that. What I can do, I believe, is write to a specific, write that first p tag. And so in theory, if I follow this strategy, I could just keep doing this all the way down to 57, but that gets overwhelming really quick. So what I can do is I can write a for loop. So this is something that I can't write on my own. I have to have the IDE write it for me. I have to think real hard about doing it otherwise. Okay, so here we can say ps.length, and then I can say let p equal ps.index, or brackets index. So this is going to give me each instance of those, and then I can do the add event listener. So you see how much more code I have to write here to handle the same console.log click. I think that's right. Let's see. Okay, so that seemed to work. So now if I click on this, it's working. But it was a bunch of, like, a lot more, where if I'm doing that same, so let's just refresh this, and I can do the jQuery selection. So this is going to get me all of the instances. So this is kind of like query selector all. And I can do like click function. Okay, so now when I click on each of these, it's going to do it on its own. So that's like a really obvious case where it's much more consolidated, and the jQuery is doing a bunch of the work for you of saying, okay, we have this selection, let's get all of those elements and let's add that click event to all of those elements. And so you can do that without without all that extra code. And then you can also add this. Let's do this dot text. So you still have the ability to get specific around each of your click events. Any questions with that?
Nope.
Cool. So, yeah, jQuery just makes your life a little bit easier. And so when you're writing a question to Slater, you can always just start with, using jQuery, can you write a click event on all p tags? We have a cool new update. This will be streaming in, so we won't have to be waiting quite as long. So that's coming soon. Anyway, we'll come back to that later. So let's go over these key concepts now that we have an idea of how to understand our code and also jQuery versus JavaScript. So I was thinking about, like, what's the really critical concepts that I need to understand in order to be able to write useful code for your JavaScript or for your Webflow project. So the first is selectors. And so all of you have got your own project in front of you, I believe. So this is where I want us to all be writing code together. So I'm looking at Edgar Allan, but why don't you look at whatever you're looking at, and let's see if there's an H1 on the page. So can everybody select an H1 from their project? And is that automatic for you, or are there any questions? Does everybody have that? Yeah, so the H1 is going to be simple. It's just going to be H1. And you can see, like, how many am I getting with that H1. And this is a well-designed project, and so there's only one H1, like it should be. So I only have that one instance. If I do the p tag, or let's do an anchor tag this time, I have 86 of those. So one of the challenging things with Webflow is Webflow developers think about a chunk of HTML in a generic fashion. So you're not writing a specific component here that that is unique to the rest of the site. You're writing, say, utility classes to say, okay, this particular H1 is going to have a headline class and it's going to be massive, and we're going to use this margin top XS. So the problem you have with JavaScript a lot of times is like, okay, I want to write to an anchor tag, but I don't have a good selector to select from. So there's a few different approaches here. One is we're more specific when we are in Webflow. So I can come in here. So if I want to write something to that H1, and let's say it's an anchor tag as opposed to an H1. Like let's say we want to link to this particular like hero area link. So this is all generic, and there's no ID on it, and there's no data attribute. So what I found to be kind of the best way probably is to write a data attribute. And we're kind of defining how we want to do that here at Edgar Allan. But I could say data selection. It's like I got logged out. And I could say a hero bouncing me. Okay, I could have wrote like say hero, so if we come back in here and let's just edit this as HTML. So data selection equals hero link. So I take this. Can anybody tell me how to select an attribute?
Square brackets.
Great. Okay, what's my problem with this?
Quote marks are not necessary.
Yeah.
No. Data selection,
Yeah, well,
then square mark.
The quote marks are breaking it because it's saying, okay, here's a string, and then here's a string, and this is not a string. This is thinking it's a variable. So there's a few different approaches you can do to this. I think you can take off the quote marks, and that returns something. You could also go with single quotes inside of double quotes, and or vice versa, where you can do like that. What I like best though is to use these squiggly, or like these other quote marks. So just below the escape button. Those are my favorite things to use now because they make it so that you're always, or you're never running into like a conflict with your tick marks. And the other thing is you can do, let's say var test equals test. You can do this, it's called a template literal. So I can say, I can write test here. So I can use like a JavaScript variable. And so if I have a big template that I'm writing inside of JavaScript, I want to use that template literal because I can use line breaks and I can pull in variables. So that's what I would recommend, is using these tick marks. IDs have been the way that we've always solved this in the past. If you want to be specific to a single element, then you write an ID. The problem you have with that with Webflow is that ID can be automatically changed without you, the user, changing it. there's nothing worse than like having a nice piece of a website that's working, and then because someone else added another ID to the page, like, or changes the name of something, Webflow does an automatic update sometimes to that ID, and so that's why data attributes seems to be the way to go. Classes work great if there's multiple things you're targeting, but I think classes can impact your kind of Webflow process or Webflow development way of doing things. And so the data attribute is never going to change, and you can be very specific in what you're targeting. I will say there are times where I'm working on a project, someone else is in the editor, and I just need to select something. So you can get very clever. So how about everybody go to edgarallen.com and let's see who can select this ghost H2 right here. Because there are 15 H2s on this page. So how do you select this particular H2?
Do you mean without a data attribute, right? You don't have access to that.
Yeah, so you only have access to what's on the page right now.
I would use first of kind for this one because it's first. Or I would
So how
check.
do you do it?
Let me ask
Why don't
Slater.
you write the code and send it into the chat, and I'll copy and paste. Okay, so Berno's got the first entry. Not bad. It's not quite right though, because you got letter run, which is right here. So how would you update that?
That should be a 0.
Yeah. So the big thing with pretty much everything JavaScript is it's 0 index. And so it's not 1, 2, 3, 4, it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that does get us ghosts. What's wrong with this though? So if I write dot text, you'll notice I'm getting an error. Does anybody know why I get that error? So this is taking a jQuery element, and then it's just making it a JavaScript element by using this. So if we wanted to stick with this syntax, we could do a jQuery element inside of a jQuery element. And now when I do that, I get the ghost. So not the prettiest syntax, but it works. Okay, let's see what Marina's got here. So I've never used contains like this. Let's see. Didn't look like it works. Where's this contains come from, Marina?
I asked
It's
Slater.
Dude, huh. Let's see if this works. Nope. Yeah, this in theory it could work. I don't know why it's not working now.
But it works for me.
Not. Yeah, I don't know. It's not. I'm not getting it. So Marina, one thing you
Could
were
you
saying-
use... Sorry.
Yeah.
No, just let's with Marina, and then I have a question.
So using this first one works. That's a jQuery method. problem with this one is it's only first. You could also get last. And then you can also, this one I never really know. I think it's nth child, and then you can say, let's do 0. jQuery nth child. Okay, so you can put it in there. I guess, I feel like there's a method version of it as well. Maybe it's get. Let's see if that's the... No. Yeah, so, and child 0. Let's see if that does it. Huh. Where is this coming from? Your Edgar Allan. Yeah, so this might be getting, I don't even know where this is on the page. Yeah, anyway, so this one's not quite right either, obviously. Let's see if there's a... Oh yeah, this .eq is the one. I don't know what EQ stands for, but yeah, there we go. So there's lots of different ways you can do it. One other thing that I often do is I'll go up the stack. So if we wanted that ghost, like maybe there's some sort of ID or class further up in the stack that you can leverage. I'm not seeing that here though, but in theory I could say, but this is still going to return a bunch of different. Yeah, so kind of being clever with your selectors, it's sometimes a shortcut. Probably the best thing you should do is just write a data attribute like we were saying earlier, but it can come in handy. Any other questions or comments around selectors?
I had one.
Okay, so
Can we use the data attributes without the value?
I believe you can. It's probably dependent on some different things, but like, let's say, this is a bad example, but h2 class. So this should pretty much get all h2s, and it's because every h2 is going to have, well, I guess there are some h2s that don't have a class. So yeah, what's another attribute that we could, let's say, let's get anchor tags. So we have 86 of those. Let's see how many of them will send us off to a different, like open up a new tab. So if I do just target to answer the question, there's only 8 of them with the target. And if we wanted to be specific, equals underscore blank, 8 of them as well. So does that make sense? Cool. Okay, so step 1, you need to make sure you're selecting the right thing. That's kind of key. Step 2 is you write an event to it. So let's do on click event. So the first thing I need to do is I need to select the right one. I'm just going to get all anchor tags though. and I'm going to do the event of click. It can also be on click. And then I'm going to write a function to it. And I'm going to do e dot prevent default, because I don't want that anchor tag to actually send me off to the page it's linked to. And then I'm going to do console.log click. Okay, so I've written all of these events to all of these anchor tags. I've written an event to all of these anchor tags. So you'll notice I've selected the right thing, and it's going to be all of these. And I'm running a function based off of the click event. What other events can you guys think of that are kind of common events that you use within Webflow?
Append.
Append's not an event. That's a method that you would run on an event. Okay, so we're getting some. So Berno said hover, yes. Pablo said blur, yes. So hover, I think we know, is hovering over an element. Blur is leaving input. So this event here is called focus, and then when I unfocus, it's a blur. Yes, Berno, there is scroll. Yes, Nicola, focus. Document ready, so on ready is an event that we use all the time. There's a ton more though. I think we've kind of covered like the really common ones though, so good job everyone. Okay, so here's a click event. On change, so this is for a select. And you'll notice this is a little bit weird. This is writing the event to the HTML. For us in JavaScript and specifically jQuery, we're just going to use the change part of it, use the click part of it. We're going to use mouse over, which is a little bit more specific than hover because it's mousing over, but you also have the mouse out. So if you want to write specific functions to when the user scrolls into a section or moves his mouse into a section, moves it out, you can do that with both of these events. So key down, this one's a good one. So if you're typing something, you can do something there. And then we talked about load. These are not all of them though. I wonder if there's a full list of JavaScript events. Yeah, so clipboard, this is when you copy something. I'm sure I don't even understand all of these. But drag and drop wheel, that's interesting. DOM mutation, this is a change in the DOM. Focus, form, full screen. So there's a ton of events, you'll notice. But I think
what is a mutation observer that I know I've seen used a lot of times to like recalculate the width of something?
Yeah. So you have to.
Event?
Yeah, it's not easy to write an observer, but if you write an observer and you're saying you're observing, like let's say this section, then if like a new element is, let's say you append a new H1, that mutation observer would pick up that change and would let you know that something has changed. If you're writing mutation,
I don't write them, like ChatGPT writes them for me, but
yeah.
I do use it a lot for like window, like browser resizing. You sometimes need to recalculate, do some math on that.
Yeah, and that's probably a good example of when to use it. You probably should question yourself if you're doing it the right way. If it's observer, there's tends to be better ways of doing things, but resizing the browser may be a good reason to have an observer. Where I get trapped using them sometimes is like Webflow has Webflow.js. It's interacting with your page, and sometimes you have to wait for Webflow.js to finish. I really hate it when I have to use an observer though, because it's convoluted. So Berno said the Webflow push event. Yeah, that's an event specifically defined by Webflow. So that Webflow.js creates that event. That's not a common browser event, obviously. Cool. We are getting close to time. So the next one, flow control. That is, for example, in this code that was written to handle our click events, you'll notice there's code that is going to run and there's code that isn't going to run. So this if statement's kind of very common kind of flow control concept, where if something's true, run that code, otherwise don't run this other code. Another kind of flow control type thing is a for loop. So you may want to run the same thing X number of times. So a for loop's good for that. There's all sorts of other concepts that you could think of, like sometimes you'll see return false in your code. That just means, okay, you hit this, stop running the code. And anyway, those, like, I think the if statement's kind of the best kind of beginner example of that. So I want us to do kind of a quiz together. So what I want you all to be able to do is, let's write a click event to any number of elements. We can just do it to the p tags, or you could do it to all of the elements, but maybe p tags is where we can start. I want you to be able to click on the p tag, and if there are more than 5 characters, so let's write this real quick. So select all p tags, add click event to all p tags, console log the text of the p tag if the text is more than 5 characters. Okay, so that's your quiz. I'll give you 5 minutes to solve it, and then we'll solve together kind of in the last couple minutes. Do you guys feel equipped to be able to do this?
We're doing it on the EA side, right? On the inspector.
You can do it anywhere, as long as there's some p tags to click on. And yeah, just do it in the inspector. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'll solve it as well and kind of show you mine.
Can you share what we need to do on the chat here on Riverside?
Yes, I can. Feel free to ask questions if you have them. So Pablo's ready. And realize you can always press up to get any code that you're writing. So if you write something, it doesn't quite work, just press up to get your code back, and then you have to start from scratch. How we doing? I solved it just now. I'm ready to share with you guys. Okay, here, I'll share my screen again. Cool. Okay, let's refresh my page. And here we go. So I wrote mine to a bunch of different tags. So for example, p tag, h1, h2, anchor tag, image, and video. So if I click on this, I get text built with 3.js. So that works. This didn't work. Any ideas why it didn't work? Because it's an h4. So if I made a quick update, I could just say h4. And you'll notice I'm just using this comma to be able to add more to my click events. So now when I click on each of these, they're working. You'll notice it's running twice because I ran that chunk of code twice. And you'll notice my anchor tags aren't directing me anywhere because I wrote this prevent default. So if we're looking at the code, let me just refresh one more time. And here we have, so I'm making a selection, in this case 103 items. I'm adding an event to that selection, specifically the click event, and then I'm running a function. And I add this e as a parameter for my function. That's just saying the event. So I can take that and I can prevent the default. So that's really only doing something for this anchor tag probably, where it's saying don't do that default behavior of sending me to a different page. So then I create a variable. That variable is referencing this, which we didn't really get into too much, but it's like whatever that thing is that we clicked on. So I'm getting that element, and again it's a jQuery element, and I'm running text on it. So then I have my flow control. I'm doing my ltext.length, and if it's more than 5, then I console log that text. Otherwise I just say less than 5 characters. And so you'll notice that's working here. So that's less than 5 characters. This is more than 5 characters, and so it's consoling all of that. Any questions with this, or did any of you solve it in different ways? Anyone?
Pretty similar solution, not as elaborate. So
Yeah, I shared mine on the chat.
Okay. Yeah, so here's Pablo's. Let's quickly walk through that. Okay, so he's using, this is the straight JavaScript way of doing it. This for each is very similar to a for loop, and it accepts, or this is the, for each p tag that he's looping through, this gives you that that value. So in the first case, it's going to be that first p tag, and he's adding that event listener, the click event, and p.textcontent.length. So again, the raw JavaScript way of doing this, and logging that to the console. So that all looks great. So you'll notice this is my version, and then this is his version. Cool. Well, we're past time. Let's hop back here. So we've gone through all of this. Good job on the quiz. I'm happy to stick around a little bit longer if you have questions. Otherwise, here's your homework. Write some JavaScript that includes selectors, events, and flow control kind of in your projects this week. And let me know where you butt up against questions or issues. Cool. Anything else before we hop off?
No.
Good seeing everyone.
Thank you.
And we'll do it again next week.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.